All right, today we're looking at the Kreg Foreman pocket hole machine, and we'll start by just demonstrating the unit and seeing what it can do. Now they're running a special for $50 off through the end of the year, so if you're already sold on this unit, just drop down to the description box. There you'll find a link to that special. If you're on the fence like I was for a while, just watch on and we'll look at the finer points of this pocket hole machine. I read a comment in a review somewhere that the table of the Foreman was a phenolic, but rest assured it's machined aluminum. I usually like to give myself some tick marks on the back of the workpiece to roughly indicate where I need pocket holes drilled. And looking at that layout, I think we might add another one right in the middle. That looks better. So the cut quality is just largely dependent on the material that you're using. For hardwoods, obviously that's no problem, but for plywood, if you're using a nice hardwood veneer ply, you'll also get really crisp holes with that as well. Now today I'm using the Foreman without dust collection, and surprisingly there's much less dust and chips on the workbench. And I think that's just because you're drilling upside down, so the chips naturally just fall into the hollow of the machine. But let's hook up a dust collector and see how it does. To use dust collection, just remember to attach the included hose and secure the fittings. And then just add your dust extractor or shop vac to the port on the back of the tool. Now this is kind of nice because this is an automated dust extractor, so it'll come on every time I cut a pocket hole. When setting the bit depth, if your drill bit won't come anywhere near the blue setup jig, regardless of where you set the stop, it may just be that you're reading the fence settings incorrectly. So don't use the front of the fence as a reference for those 3/4 inch marks. Always use the back of the fence. One place I really like to use these retractable stops. You can push them in and slide them to the side when they're not needed, but when you do want to activate them, just slide them and they're spring loaded. So for instance, if I wanted to do a cut that didn't require them, they're not in the way, they just push back out of the way, but they're there when you need them. And the application I really like having them is for small or narrow work pieces like these 2-inch face frame parts. And just push them in and slide them to the outside to lock them in place. And inside the cabinet, hardly a trace of dust. Looks good. To change bits, just pull this hitch pin. That'll drop the linkage down. And you can slide the motor assembly out. It does stay plugged in, so of course remember to unplug your tool. Then it's a quick release chuck, just like on an impact driver, so you will need the hex style bits to use as replacements. And pop the pin back in. At the back of the machine, this is the knob and locking nut that sets your bit depth. Adjusting the workpiece clamp is really easy. My overall impressions of the machine, it's fast. Compared to a portable pocket hole jig, you'll be amazed how quickly you can churn out that joinery. And as far as the cutting action, it seemed almost effortless thanks to that long lever arm, so I think you'll appreciate that as well. If you've ever struggled with manually setting clamps to use a small pocket hole jig, you'll appreciate this after a long day in the shop. But it might just depend on how much work you've got to do and how many pocket holes you're cutting. If you're just doing occasional projects, it would certainly make more sense to get a portable pocket hole jig. But stepping up to a larger Foreman or pocket hole machine might just be the ticket if you've got large cabinet projects ahead of you. Now, as far as negatives, you could argue that the sides are made of plastic and not steel, and I suppose that could be a drawback for some people. But remember, a solid steel version would be 2 to 3 times the money. So making the sides plastic and keeping the top a robust machined aluminum surface is really the sweet spot for most buyers. The fence reminds me of something that you might find on a contractor's tile saw, and these have never been my favorite because they're maybe not the most accurate to adjust. There's nothing keeping them parallel. They just have kind of two adjustment points and you tighten them down. On the bright side, you don't have to move this fence very often. In fact, if you're typically using 3/4 inch thick material and 1 1/4 inch screws like most folks do when they're cutting pocket holes, you really just set it and forget it. So I think any negatives or sloppiness of the fence kind of go away because once it's locked down, it is really solid. I did come across a couple of isolated complaints about the clamping system. A couple of folks noted that it was hard to get the workpiece under the clamp and still have enough clamping pressure. In practical use, I didn't notice that problem at all. In fact, if you just set the clamp pad slightly above the thickness of your workpiece, it offers plenty of clamping pressure. So much so that I often wouldn't use the retractable stops because the clamp did such a good job on its own. Now the little blue jig that helps you set the drill bit depth is not my favorite. It's just a little bit lightweight, but ultimately you only have to reset this if your screw length is outside the range of 1 to 1.5 inch. So most of the time mine just lives in this handy storage compartment. Alright guys, thanks for stopping by the Thoughtful Woodworker shop. Now if you have a Kreg Foreman or any brand of pocket hole machine, drop me a note in the comment section. I'd love to hear your experience with using a machine like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.